Everyone, welcome to our next installment of our In Conversation With series. Today, we are honored to have Mina Mishrikey from Merida Capital joining us. So Mina, welcome.
Thank you, Erica. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. So just let's start off with you. Just give us a little bit of your background. And I will say that I had the pleasure of meeting you in person last November. At the CWCB Expo. It was probably, well, no, not probably, it was definitely the first time that I'd been out in public since COVID, in that kind of social setting. And the conversation I had with you was like probably the most fun I'd had in a very, very long time. So I'm very happy our paths have crossed again, and thank you for taking the time to do this interview. So please tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, thank you for the kind words. Again, my name is Mina Mishrikey. I'm a senior partner at a private equity fund called Merida Capital Holdings. We invest in the cannabis and hemp emerging industries. We are one of the larger institutional investors in the broader cannabis space, with about well, depending on how you count it, but about over 400 million of assets under management. We're on our fourth fund in 5 years. And we also act as a sub-advisor for another fund called Replant Hemp, which is focused on investing in the hemp fiber and grain space. I'm the senior partner on the investment team. I run the investment team, and I focus day in and day out, talking to the best companies in the cannabis and hemp industries, and trying to parse through which ones have the brightest futures, and supporting those small businesses. So it's a fun job, and I get to talk to intelligent people like yourself. So thanks again for having me.
Oh, thank you very much. So the investment in cannabis and hemp is, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively new thing. Did you start out doing both, or did you start out primarily just focusing on medical and adult use cannabis, or has it always been cannabis and hemp?
Well, the Merida story, it's always been cannabis focused. Our first fund, to go back to 2016, my managing partner and partner in crime is a guy named Mitch Berukowitz, and he started investing in this space over a decade ago. He actually won licenses in Connecticut in 2013 and Minnesota in 2014, and claims he's the first official MSO as an individual. But those experiences led him to forming a fund, because at the time, when you were an operator back in those early days, there was really no industry, no infrastructure. You wanted lighting equipment, or the right CO2 machinery for your indoor grow, or even like child resistant packaging. You'd have to go to the far reaches of Alibaba, and try to find your supply and your services on a kind of patchwork basis. So he started to fund because he saw a real industry growing, and he saw, rightfully so, that the biggest need at the time was that support, that infrastructure, building that infrastructure. So the first fund was primarily focused, and this was before I joined. I joined in the second fund, but the first fund, the focus was primarily on the picks and axes, so to speak. There are investments in hydroponic suppliers, in lighting companies, and data companies, and software platforms, anything but touching the plant. And in the second fund, as the industry started to mature, the fund's purview widened. And so we started investing in plant touching operators, cultivation, processing, etc. Largely THC. not as focused on the hemp side of the equation. We did make one investment in the CBD space. We were largely skeptical of the space for a few reasons. Number one, people have been smoking or using cannabis for 5,000 years, and people know what that effect is to their body. And with CBD, there was really an education that needed to happen with the consumer. And, for some people it works, and for some people it doesn't. And really, it's not so much that it doesn't, it's just we all have our own personal metabolism as it relates to a lot of these cannabinoids, which actually reminds me of a sidebar, which we can maybe talk about later, which involves testing your DNA and trying to find out which cannabinoids are best suited for you as an individual. But in any event, the other reason that we were sort of hesitant about the CBD space, it was really a regulatory exception that got people excited. You could sell across state lines, potentially you could sell in a CVS or a Walgreens. And of course, a lot of that didn't end up happening because the FDA didn't provide proper guidance, and still the industry, that CBD industry, operates in a gray area. But the third thing too is there was not really a lot of barriers to entry. A lot of people flooded into the space, a lot of mom and shop pop type brands, a lot of inconsistency with quality, and really just a flood of supply without the demand to fulfill that supply. And so we learned a lot from that experience, and thankfully we've been able to kind of turn around that one investment. But it really I guess made us think about what is the right way to approach the hemp industry. And that is when we started thinking about the fibering applications, primarily fiber applications to date. And that began a journey and has led us to kind of where we're at today.
Yeah, so much to kind of unpack there, and so much potential. So in the beginning, I guess being a private equity company gave you the flexibility to not have as many hurdles as far as banking goes with touching THC side of the industry, or did you? Like, was that something that you had to overcome, or I'm not sure I understand how that part works, because I know banking in general is still a big problem for the cannabis industry. So I was just curious as to, on the investment side, like how that works.
I think however way you're involved in the cannabis industry, there's going to be additional challenges, even if you're a fund like ourselves. I think those issues hamper a lot of our portfolio level companies that are actually, for example, touching the plant, whether they're a cultivator or a processor or a dispensary. And we invest in all sorts of, we invest in all of those areas. But for a fund, I mean, even for a fund like ours, we're SEC registered, we're a Reg D private placement. There's nothing illegal about investing in our fund, even though we're focused on investing in the cannabis and hemp industry. A lot of our LPs or our investors, which include, the people that are working at the fund, are, as well, we're including myself, we are also investors in our own fund. A lot of our investors are individuals, high net worth individuals, family offices. What they're not, by and large, to date, are institutional investors like pension funds or fund of funds or indexes and the like. And so, that has, really limited the amount of capital that has come into the space. There are reasons that institutional investors will not invest in the space yet. That's going to change, obviously, when our friends in Washington, D.C. get their act together. But it's not because of the structure of our fund, or because we invest in the hemp space. It has more to do with, they have bank lines from a government agency, or other restrictions that preclude them from investing in the space. But it doesn't preclude an individual investor, or even a family office, or even some small institutional investors from investing in the space. It's just, the bigger you are, the more relationships you have, the more people you have to answer to, and
Right.
the more you have to be delicate about kind of investing in something that is federally illegal on the cannabis THC side of things.
So leading that into the hemp side of things, has the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill that did federally legalize it, has that opened up more doors to some of those more traditional institutional type investors, or are they still a little bit sketchy about whether it's something they want to invest in?
Well, I think, as sort of a mixed bag platform that Merida is, I think we have very large commitments contingent on federal legalization. So the desire is there. It's just there are certain hangups with the federally illegal side of things. Now, we have actually brought in a lot of investors just by virtue of our focus and being a leading investor in the industrial hemp side of the business. A lot of people are attracted to the sustainability and ESG aspects of the platform, but also, and I can talk more about the economics of it, but of just the opportunity from an investment perspective is just massive. And so that has attracted a lot of money into our fund, where some people might have a hiccup with just investing in businesses that are all about getting you high. But we have a pretty diversified platform. We have biotech investments, we have software investments, we have obviously industrial applications, and that has led to a lot of investors joining our platform. And on the replant side, it'll be interesting to see, without the handcuffs of touching the federally illegal side of the plan, meaning replant doesn't touch anything that's federally illegal. They invest solely in the industrial and fiber and grain hemp areas. That it'll be interesting to see. The fund just launched, but it'll be interesting to see what sort of institutional capital flow comes into that fund without those handcuffs.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. It's going to be fascinating to see, and there's so much potential. And but as you said too, I think some of the challenges is that CBD has kind of taken all the oxygen out of the room of the hemp industry for a very long time, and there's a whole lot of people that sort of, in their minds, the words hemp and CBD are kind of synonymous, and that don't really understand the true potential that the industrial side of the crop actually has. Not that CBD isn't always going to be important, especially if the FDA gets their act together and comes up with a reasonable regulatory framework to legitimize these products. CBD will have a bright future. But when we look at the ESG side of things, the environmental impacts, in particular of what hemp can do, it really is on the fiber and grain side that we see the most potential. And from what I understand, you're the one who kind of led the charge in getting Merida to sort of look at hemp in addition to cannabis. And is that true? And what did you see that made you think that hemp is something that deserves a serious look?
Well, it is true, although my boss might disagree. But when we think about the industrial, when we take a step back, our mandate is to invest in cannabis. Cannabis includes the hemp plant, right? It's a genus of the cannabis plant. So we like to think that that we've studied all industry applications of this plant. And in studying and really learning through our CBD experience, which, by the way, I do not want to belittle. It actually hasn't been a great investment for anyone except for maybe GW Pharma, and GW Pharma had the benefit of taking a drug through an FDA process and benefiting from insurance reimbursement for their medicine, which we think, by the way, is a huge theme that will hit the broader cannabis space in the coming years, and an area that we're very focused on taking advantage of. But I think CBD, I think the brightest applications for CBD are all the pharma opportunities that we're looking at that kind of parallel that GW Pharma story. And so we look at CBD investments from that perspective all the time. But when we think about fiber and grain, you're talking about total addressable markets that are massive. I mean, this plant can be used for obviously protein on the grain side, and potentially animal feed if the USDA approves the use of hemp in animal feed, which is a much better and more efficient protein and amino acid source that's digestible for animals than other proteins that are being used today. But you think about the use of fiber in the lining of automobiles and in animal bedding and textiles, the clothing we wear, obviously, much more efficient use of our natural resources than cotton as an alternative. When we think about, one of our companies is creating non-woven fabric products using hemp fibers. So, think about biodegradable wet wipes that we use once and throw away. Those are all 90% petroleum-based synthetic materials. You use them once, you throw them away, they sit in a dump for 1,000 years. What about making a biodegradable version of that? That, by the way, is more absorbent and actually works better. Or a biodegradable wipe or a diaper, or a biodegradable feminine hygiene product. When we think about construction applications, another one of our investments, and the use of carbon, of hemp as a store of carbon, and then putting that into our walls and into our insulation. When we think about alternative forms of concrete, I mean, these are touching so many different markets. I could keep on going on and on. We haven't even gotten into, energy sources. And so the total addressable market for this plant are massive. Now, the question really, is it a viable alternative to, the non-sustainable options that are out there? And so that's what we need to build together and address. But really, if I were to boil it down, to answer your question, if I were to boil it down, it's just it's a much bigger market opportunity than just smoking a doobie. And so that's and the other interesting thing about it is there are a lot of the industry is standing itself up right now in North America. And there are a lot of, challenges and obstacles. And in some ways, we like those challenges and obstacles. Those challenges and obstacles really didn't exist when CBD came to the forefront in 2018. You had very little barriers to entry. Now, if you can kind of be a business that, is an early part of building this industry, you can take advantage of the fact that, these are big industrial businesses that have to be built, and can really have a moat around themselves for a significant period of time, with demand already that far exceeds the potential supply that can come out of North America. So for all those reasons, we were very attracted to it. Not to mention the fact that, I don't know, it might be nice to, address saving our planet and, thinking about more than just, making our shareholders rich, but having something that aligns with benefiting all the stakeholders of our planet. So
I agree. And, because I always say that, like there's probably maybe 10, 15% of the population that are into high THC cannabis in one way or the other. But 100% of people use paper products and plastic products and, products that have the potential to be at least a little bit disruptive by hemp and improved and made better, stronger, and more sustainable. But that being said, like the challenges that we have right now is that a lot of these companies, they're startups to, be honest, like they need capital to be able to be brought to scale. So when you talk to potential investors, do they by and large, do they get it? And do they see this as too risky? Like they want to see some of these businesses be up and running and become profitable before they'll put their money into it? Or are they looking at this as like a, kind of a very rare opportunity to kind of get in on the ground floor of something that has the potential to explode and be huge? I mean, as every industry could be impacted by this. So I'm kind of, curious as to what those kind of people think. Like, do they get it, or is there a whole lot of education that still needs to be done, or are people waiting for more science to actually prove some of these concepts out, or where are their heads at?
Well, I think from an investor standpoint, I think it's a mix of both. But I think regardless, there's still a lot of education that needs to happen, not only amongst investors but amongst governmental agencies and the like to shape regulations and incentives to expedite what is one of the most sustainable investments that we can make into our planet. So I think it's interesting because we're real time. I think things are changing very quickly. For example, we've been investing in the industrial hemp application space for, I don't know, maybe 3 years. And we've probably put more money into the space than anyone, which is really sad because we haven't put that much money into it. One of the first investments that we made was in a decortication platform, which is really the bottleneck for the industry right now. The industry is not going to take off until there's enough fiber production facilities that can take fiber from bales of fiber from a farm, and process that into its constituent parts, and then make a market and sell it downstream, both domestically and internationally. The demand is there and then some in terms of buying these products. There's just not enough supply because you've got this bottleneck of not enough processors that are up and running and online. Well, right now, online, whether it's our investment in Canada, which is a company called Canadian Rockies Hemp Corporation, they're about to, they've been building for 3 years. They're about to turn on their 2 decortication lines. Or you have an INT Hemp out of Montana, or you have a South Bend out of Kansas, or you have Formation Ag in Colorado, or Change Ag in Saskatchewan. I mean, all of these platforms are coming online right now as we speak.
Yep.
And none of them view each other as competition. These are regional supply chain businesses. You need to be close to the farms to make the economics work. You can sell overseas. In fact, our friends in Canada are selling to China. That's their first order, which is ironic because China has the biggest hemp industry in the world. They just don't have the technology that we do here, which is really interesting because we're just standing this up real time. But that's the kind of bottleneck. And when I talk to investors about investing in some of these platforms, it's really the ideal time to come in because we personally have done we've done the risky work of sticking our neck out 3 years ago before it was built and building it. And now they're about to come online. And it's sort of, all of these decortication platforms, it's not just our investment, they're all kind of in the same zip code. And it's just an ideal time. It's really going to explode over the next year because they're all coming online, allowing for, more farmers to farm hemp because a lot of them don't want to do it because they want to ensure that they have a place to sell their crop. And right now, it's been very uncertain until right now. And this is all just starting to percolate. And so, with replant launching, it'll be, interesting to see if that message can be conveyed, because I couldn't think of a better time to get into this space. We've actually been the ones taking kind of the real risk till now. And now I think it's opening up to a broader base of investors that have less risk appetite than, say, a private equity VC fund like ourselves.
Right. And unfortunately, there's risk involved in any investment, and but the potential for this to be huge. I always tend to once an activist advocate, always an advocate. Like, I can't help but look at it through that lens and what the potential for this is. Like, the money doesn't faze me. It's like, this has to happen because we need to save the planet. And while certainly hemp is not a silver bullet that's going to fix every problem that we have, I think it's such an important piece of the puzzle in how it can bring so many different aspects together. And one of the most important is, like you said, is localized supply chains. Like, that is what has to happen. So it's fantastic that we're building an industry where everybody doesn't have to look at each other as competition, but just another link in that chain to get us where we need to go. Because, based on our economic impact report, if we're going to grow 10 to 12 million acres in this country, we're going to need more than 500 decortication facilities all across this country. And they literally need to be everywhere. So this is an opportunity that we can provide economic growth to every single state, every different rural farming community, and bring value to that, and hopefully make investors some money in the process. So I'm hoping that that message is coming through, and that the investors will be willing to invest in this type of thing, because it's just absolutely has to happen. Waiting around for the government to invest properly in infrastructure is not going to happen. At least not in my lifetime. So I'm super excited about this, and hopeful that we can make this happen. And I have every confidence that with brilliant people like you, taking the charge and working on the education and making investors understand that we'll get there sooner rather than later. And thank you so much for your investments that you've already made. There's that impact is huge, and it shows what's possible. And I think that's what we always have to keep our eye on. This industry has had some up and downs over the years, particularly on the CBD side, and fiber and grain is just really starting to develop, and will hopefully hit its stride. And then it's going to be exponential growth from there. So is your fund?
I think just one thing I just want to make clear is, we're a fiduciary, so we want to obviously make money for our investors and our
we
LPs.
have to, right? Like,
and our focus is, of course, like, there's my personal views about what this plant can do, but make no mistake about it, like, we're greedy bastards, and we view this as
don't tell me that.
We view this as one of the best investment opportunities in the space, and I think that's important to stress. I mean, when you think about the demand curve as this industry matures, just to place a pin in it, there's excessive demand now, but where the demand is missing is from really big, kind of Fortune 500 companies. Like, for example, a Unilever. Unilever is not going to enter into this space until the supply chain is built, until it's matured, until there are scaled players that can that handle their excessive demand. And and so what you're going to see is an industry slowly mature and get to a point of scale. And once it gets to the point of scale, demand is going to go. You're going to have some very big companies that are going to be knocking on the doorsteps. They're already doing R&D. The Ford Motor companies of the world are already doing R&D, but they're 4 or 5 years away from really integrating this massively into their business models. So, like any emerging industry and emerging market, there are elevated risks, but we feel that a lot of those risks are negated by just sort of some of these supply demand dynamics.
Yeah. So do you have thoughts on how that piece of it's going to work? So the decortication is definitely, I think everybody concedes that is the bottleneck. Like, there's farmers that want to grow, there's manufacturers that want to use it, but until there's reliable supply chains for those raw materials, nothing can happen. So do you see it where it's going to be like for somebody like Unilever, there's not going to be one decortication facility that's going to be able to supply them. So how do we ramp up investment in decortication in a methodical way, so that we can, do we pick an industry and say we want to focus on creating a supply chain that can service them? Or is it, because one facility I'm not going to say this right. They're not going to be able to service a really large industry. So I think right now, the decortication facilities that are up and running are finding smaller niche markets that they can service, whether it's for animal bedding or, some of that lower hanging fruit. So how do we prevent kind of the glut that happened in the CBD market from happening on the fiber and grain side? How do we keep ramping it up, but keep that balance?
Well, first of all, the barriers to entry on the industrial side are far greater than they are in the CBD space. And so I don't think you're going to see a flood of supply that hits the market. It's going to take a long time. I mean, even as you mentioned it earlier, we need several hundred of these decorticators. Right now, there's less than 10 that are really operating. And so it's going to take a long time. These are like building manufacturing facilities. They take time. And in terms of they don't all do the same thing either. They all have specialties. There's all sorts of processes, whether it's dry fiber decortication or whether it's wet processing, which falls more into kind of the fine fabric applications, like the non-woven fabrics that I mentioned earlier. And also where you are, kind of geographically, will play a big role in the type of fibers and the type of end industries that you service. So our platform up in Canada is so far north. It's north of Edmonton, that number one, they don't really, the farmers are not really growing corn and soy, which are the very heavily subsidized industries in America. They're growing more barley and canola and so on and so forth. And so this is really a premium product for them to kind of fit into their kind of rotational crop plans. But by virtue of being so far north, the plants grow 15, 20 feet in less than 100 days, and it's all fiber. I mean, there's very little flower at the top. It is a pure fiber play. If you come down south to where IND is in Montana, they're working with the dual crop. They're selling grain to Victory Hemp that's making, amazing grain applications for broader industry use. But they're also decorticating for fiber. And then the further south you go, where it becomes more and more humid, you'll lean towards more kind of grain and CBD varietals and less fiber. You're going to have shorter plants. The humidity plays a factor in the ability to decorticate efficiently. And so it really depends where you are. I was just in, the kind of Pennsylvania Hemp Summit last week in our great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And, there's a lot of interest interest in building this industry, people were asking me like, what do we need? And I said, well, we need to build some processing facilities locally.
Yeah.
And so, that's going to be the next step for Pennsylvania or Massachusetts. I have friends up in Massachusetts that are doing the same thing. So,
Well, it's the next
I'm
step
happy.
everywhere. It's
The next step anywhere. And that's really been our focus, is just, there are amazing platforms that we want to invest in that make amazing end products. I'm thinking of, for example, insulation for homes. And the challenge with that is it's a great product today. It should take off, but until the supply chain is matured, you're not going to achieve price parity versus the non-sustainable alternative, like a fiberglass. And so until you achieve that price parity, the consumer is going to say, oh, it might be good for the planet, but I got to watch my bank account. I got to, I have to make ends meet, right? So until we achieve that price parity, those kind of end product applications are going to take time to adapt. Now we're seeing some price parity already, depending on the product. For example, in the EU, they've instituted a single-use plastic tax that has created instant price parity for biodegradable wet wipes versus the alternative. So it's starting, and it's starting much sooner than we thought, which is heartening. But the focus of our investments have been invest in the root of the supply chain, much like we did on the cannabis side, where we were just investing in kind of like, the picks and axes back in 2016. Invest in the root of that supply chain, get that built, and then the rest of the industry will grow off of that. And then we can start investing into some of these downstream applications. And that's sort of our mindset as investors.
Sounds like a perfect plan. So for average people, is your fund something they can invest in, or is it more for higher level kind of investors, or how does that work?
Well, our fund is for accredited investors, which means it has a higher hurdle of a minimum investment amount, which is I wish it was more democratic. A lot of that has to do with the rules and regulations that we live in the U.S. and specifically from the SEC. Of course, there's lots of cannabis-related public stocks. A lot of them haven't been doing well. That fortunately, impacts us less as a private equity fund. But a lot of that has to do with just delays in making this federally legal that have impacted those securities. On the industrial hemp side, of course, we're a sub-advisor for Replant, led by Jeff Whaling, obviously head of your National Hemp Association, which we are proud supporters of, and also Michael Woods, who's the CEO of another company that we invested in called Black Buffalo, which is the construction application that I referenced earlier, that'll be using hemp for to change how we produce concrete and hemp, which is concrete and cement. So that fund is also open to accredited investors, which means it has a similarly high hurdle. There are companies in this space that are just starting to go and make public listings. None really that have direct access right now, but sometime this summer, those opportunities will start to sprout up, in particular in kind of the Canadian exchanges and the London exchanges. And then there's a lot of businesses that are already big Fortune 500 companies that are directly playing in this space, and maybe it's not public yet. And I might be beholden to keeping some of those names secret, but they are very accessible, very big public companies that are trading, on the S&P 500, for example. And I would encourage people to read everything you can about this space and read between the tea leaves and find some of those opportunities, because they exist. Unfortunately, I wish that this was a more accessible investment opportunity for, for retail investors to put their money behind. But that day will come. We just have to build it first, and there's a good reason for that. By the way, the SEC views this as, if you're building an industry from scratch, if none of these companies are public, you need institutional investors that maybe have a higher level of diligence to take that risk of losing our shirts, and get these companies to a point where they're public companies, where they're highly regulated and audited, and make them appropriate, safe, responsible investments for retail investors. And that's the whole reason why some people get upset about lack of access to maybe a fund like ours or Replant. But there's good reason for that. It's really to protect the public. So
well, thank you for taking the time to explain that. I didn't understand that, and put in that light, it does make a lot of sense, because it's protecting people. Because people would have a tendency to, kind of like gambling, like they think this is a good thing, and put all their eggs in that basket. And that's thank you for that. That was very helpful. So the short of it is, I think that patience, it will come, and the groundwork that companies like you, like Merida, and hopefully Replant are going to lay that foundation and get to the point where there are more publicly traded industrial hemp companies for everyday people to invest in. But we, just a little bit, patience has been something we've had to have for a couple of years. But then again, when you think about it, the Farm Bill passed in 2018, didn't go into effect till 2019. It really hasn't been that long in the grand scheme of things. And, building a multi-billion-dollar industry has to be expected to take some time.
Yeah, and we just have to remember too that even the CBD space hasn't taken off yet, because the FDA hasn't opined on how they are regulating the space, and that's led to the CVSs of the world saying, "I can't carry your product." It's a lack of distribution in the CBD space that has hampered everyone. It's not just that everyone saw a gold rush and tried to hitch a ride. It's much more than that. So,
yeah, very good point. All right. Well, this has been very, very helpful. I appreciate it very much. Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
No, I mean, listen, I think, whether it's my fund, Merida Capital, or whether it's Replant, we're actively raising money from accredited investors. If anyone is interested, they can find me on LinkedIn or go to our respective websites. And again, it's an honor to spend some time with you, Erica, and thank you for your leadership in this industry. And I look forward to doing this again sometime, and your next interviews. I particularly like your interviews. So thank you
very much. I'm going to be interviewing Michael Woods, I think 2 weeks from now. So I'm looking forward to that as well. We will make sure to put links to Merida's website and Replant's website on the ending slide of this video, so anybody who's interested can have a look. And yeah, I fully expect you to come back and talk with me again when we have some updates to share of what's going on. And it's been absolutely my pleasure talking with you. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this episode of In Conversation With, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.